The first light of dawn crept across the cracked earth of Dry Creek, turning the dust in the streets to a soft orange haze. A low wind carried the scent of sage and scorched timber, ruffling faded curtains and broken windows, and tugging at the hat brims of early risers. It was a town that had seen better years, if it had ever seen any at all. The wooden fronts of the buildings sagged like tired old men, and the streets were rutted from wagon wheels and long weeks without rain. Clara Bellamy stepped out from the small, ramshackle cabin that had been her only shelter since her father's passing 3 years before. She was tall for 19, with dark, tangled hair that fell down her back like a storm cloud. Her skin, once fair, was darkened by sun and wind, her gray eyes sharp and unafraid. She carried herself with the kind of stubborn grace you only saw in those who had nothing left to lose. The town hadn't been kind to her since Nathaniel left for the war 5 years ago. When her brother rode off in Union Blue, he left a promise in the air that he'd return. But time ground down promises in Dry Creek the same way it did fences and wagon wheels. And now Clara was alone. No kin, no neighbors who'd lift a hand, and certainly no friends brave enough to stand beside her. The town itself had fallen under the shadow of one man, Eldon Voss. He was a thick, brutal man, his face all hard lines and small, mean eyes. Voss ran the biggest ranch for 30 miles, owned the freight line, the general store, and more than a few men's loyalties. The law was a joke under his thumb, with Sheriff Amos Dake a willing puppet, more dog than lawman. It was Eldon's money that spoke in Dry Creek, and what it said, folks listened to. When the theft happened, a box of coin and trade goods gone missing from the locked storehouse behind Eldon's ranch, no one was surprised when he laid blame at Clara's feet. There'd been no evidence, not so much as a footprint or witness, but that didn't matter here. A girl alone was a dangerous thing. She might stir trouble, or worse, refuse to bow. The sun was already climbing by the time the sheriff came to fetch her, his face grim, as if pretending he wasn't ashamed of what he was ordered to do. 2 of Eldon's hired hands, Dan Griggs and Trace Malden, flanked him. Neither of them would meet Clara's gaze. "You come quiet, girl," Dake muttered, hand resting on his holster though she wasn't armed. Clara stood tall in the doorway of her small home, a rusted pan of water at her feet, flour dust on her hands. She didn't run, didn't beg. The whole town knew it wasn't her, and she knew they knew. But knowing and speaking were 2 different matters in Dry Creek. A small crowd gathered by the time they reached the square, a haphazard stretch of dirt surrounded by the saloon, the church, the general store, and Eldon's office. Folks pretended to busy themselves, sweeping porches, filling water troughs, but their eyes followed the slow, cruel march. The sun beat down unmercifully, turning the dust into a shimmering, blinding haze. Eldon Voss stood waiting by the post, a sun-bleached timber driven deep into the ground years before, when horse thieves and cattle rustlers were dealt with without a trial. In one hand, he held a branding iron, its tip already blackened from the morning's fire, the faint heat shimmer still clinging to it. "You're a thieving little witch," Eldon spat as she was shoved to the center. "Think you can steal from me and walk away clean? Not in my town." Clara's voice was steady, if hoarse. "I took nothing, and you know it." Eldon's lip curled. "Don't matter none what you say. The folks here need a lesson about taking what ain't theirs. You're gonna give him one." Sheriff Dake cleared his throat, but said nothing. He shifted his weight, eyes darting to the crowd, a cluster of tight-lipped men and women, no one bold enough to step forward. A few faces Clara recognized. Widow Mabel stood outside the boarding house, a hand pressed to her mouth. Young Eli from the livery had his head bowed, jaw clenched. There was no trial, no word spoken in defense. 2 of Eldon's men tied Clara's hands behind her and shoved her against the post. The rough rope bit into her wrists, and the wood, hot from the rising sun, burned against her back. The branding iron hissed as it came to life in the coals again, smoke rising in a thin, cruel line. Eldon held it up, turning to the gathered faces. "Let this be a mark to all," he called. "There's no mercy for thieves in Dry Creek." Clara bit down hard, tasting blood, but she wouldn't give them the scream they wanted. When the iron touched flesh, a sharp, Searing pain sliced through her shoulder like a lightning strike. Her body jerked involuntarily, a ragged sound tearing from her throat despite herself. Some in the crowd flinched. A child whimpered. Widow Mabel turned away. When it was done, Eldon let the iron fall back into the coals and spat in the dirt. Leave her. Let the sun do the rest. Sheriff Dake hesitated. How long you want her out here? Eldon grinned, a cruel, ugly thing. Till dusk. She lives. Maybe she'll learn something. She dies, won't be no loss. The crowd slowly dispersed, some shamefaced, others muttering, but none with the courage to cut her loose. Clara sagged against the post, the blistering heat already closing in like a heavy blanket. Sweat stung her eyes, and the brand on her shoulder pulsed like a coal. From the edge of town, a man watched. He was little more than a shadow, a figure half lost in the shimmering haze rising from the land. Gray beard, white hat pulled low, lean frame draped in a battered duster. Nobody paid him much mind, just another drifter passing through. But his eyes, sharp as the knives at his belt, never left the girl tied to the post. Jonas Harlan, a name long forgotten in Dry Creek, if ever known at all. They called him Iron Hand in another life. A man whose hand was faster than sin and twice as unforgiving. He'd sworn never to draw again, to let the past stay buried in the canyons and blood-soaked towns of his youth. But there was something about the girl, the way she stood before they tied her, the quiet defiance in her eyes, the steel in her voice. Jonas felt the old weight settle on his shoulders like an old, unwelcome coat. He turned from the scene and walked toward the edge of town, boots raising thin clouds of dust. Somewhere, buried beneath the floor of a shack a mile outside Dry Creek, was a revolver with his name on it. And maybe, before this day was through, it would taste daylight once more. The sun climbed high, turning Dry Creek into a shimmering furnace. Heat waves rippled above the ground, bending the air like liquid glass. The dirt streets lay empty now, save for a stray dog panting in the shade, and the girl still tied to the old post at the edge of town. Clara Bellamy's head hung forward, her hair plastered to her face with sweat. The rope bit deeper into her wrists, the skin raw beneath it. Her lips were cracked, and her throat burned for a drop of water she'd never be offered. Flies gathered at the corners of her eyes and clung to the damp streaks of blood and sweat running down her shoulder from the fresh brand. Each sting, each buzzing insult, was another cruel reminder of Dry Creek silence. Voices carried in the heavy air. Men and women moving in and out of the shade, pretending to mind their own business, while their eyes flicked toward the girl left baking in the open. Now and then, a voice called out, a cruel word, a jeer, some venom spat by those too cowardly to stand against Eldon, but brave enough to torment a girl bound and beaten. Most kept their distance, but none offered help. On the far side of the livery, a lean figure lingered in the shade of the building. Jonas Harlan stood with his shoulder against the warped boards, watching through narrowed eyes. The wide brim of his hat kept the worst of the sun off, but the heat crept under his collar just the same. His gray beard was trimmed rough, his face weathered and hard, a man whittled down to his last splinters. He'd seen many things in his years, men shot down in the streets for less than a crooked word, women run out of town for standing proud, whole families buried under stone markers because no one cared enough to stop the killing. Dry Creek was no different than the dozens of towns Jonas had passed through, each one wearing a different face, the same rotten heart underneath. He spat in the dirt and shifted his weight. The iron at his side was gone now, buried beneath the floorboards of a shack out in the canyons. He'd made a promise long ago, swore never to draw again after Red Bluff, when a boy with too much drink in him and a badge on his chest took a bullet meant for someone else. The weight of that memory clung to him tighter than the heat. Jonas pulled a dented tin flask from his coat and took a slow sip of lukewarm water. From down the street, the preacher came walking. Preacher Rowe was a gaunt man, face lined with years of drought and funeral sermons, his black coat faded and his collar wilted with sweat. He gave Jonas a weary nod as he passed and stopped a few feet away, his eyes on Clara. Damn fool town, Rowe muttered, voice rough as dry paper. Jonas didn't answer. I spoke to Eldon. The preacher went on. Told him this was no justice. told him God wouldn't turn his face from this wickedness. And what did Eldon say? Jonas asked. That he'd see me hung right next to her if I opened my mouth again. Jonas let out a short, humorless grunt. Sounds about right. Preacher Rowe rubbed a hand over his face, looking older by the second. The Lord tests a man in times like these. Only question is whether there's a soul left in this place willing to do what's right. Jonas glanced sideways at him. And is there? Rowe's silence was answer enough. From across the way, Mabel Carson emerged from the boarding house. She carried a small tin basin and a rag, eyes darting like a nervous bird's as she crossed the square. Her steps slowed near Clara. The girl's head lifted slightly, her cracked lips parting. But before Mabel could reach her, Jed Waller leaned against a hitching post and called out, "Careful, Mabel. Eldon catches you fussin'. You'll be next up on that post." Mabel hesitated, fear playing on her face. Jonas watched as the old woman bent and set the basin down in the dust, not daring to go further. She met Jonas's gaze across the square, a silent apology in her eyes, then hurried back inside. Not long after, Eli, the stable boy, crept around the corner of the livery. He couldn't have been more than 16, freckles dark against sunburned skin. He shuffled over to where Jonas stood. "Mr. Harlan," the boy whispered, "ain't right what they done." "Never is," Jonas replied, not looking at him. Eli twisted his cap in his hands. I could cut the ropes. When no one's looking. I ain't afraid." "You'd better be," Jonas said. "Eldon won't just whip a boy for that. He'll string you up." The kid's mouth worked like he wanted to argue, but couldn't. His shoulders sagged. Jonas reached out, clapped a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Ain't your fight, son?" "Not yet." Eli nodded once, then turned and vanished back into the stables. The afternoon dragged on. The sun hung high and heavy, smothering everything it touched. The heat rose off the ground in waves, the smell of sweat and dust thick in the air. Jonas leaned against the wall and let his mind drift to the past, to 100 small towns, just like this one, to gunfights at dawn and graves dug in stony earth. He remembered Red Bluff, the lawman's boy lying in the street, blood pooling in the dust, eyes wide and unblinking. He remembered the faces that turned away as he buried the iron in a shallow grave out in the canyons. Swore on the spot to let the world rot without him. But watching Clara Bellamy burn under the sun while cowards cowered behind curtains and good folks stayed silent, it gnawed at him. Word reached the saloon by mid-afternoon. A rider passing through claimed he'd heard of Nathaniel Bellamy. Said the boy had died 2 years before at Shiloh, cut down with half his company. Some claimed they'd always known it. Others just shrugged. One less man to stir up trouble. Eldon Voss, when he heard, grinned and ordered another bottle opened. Said he'd finish the girl off before nightfall. No use wasting water on a dead man's kin. As the sun began to dip, a wind picked up. Not much, but enough to stir the dust into long, trailing fingers. Jonas felt it first. An itch at the back of his neck. He stepped out from the shade and scanned the horizon. In the far distance, a thread of dust rose against the dimming sky. The town stilled. Doors creaked open. Heads appeared in windows. "Someone's coming," a voice murmured. Eldon stepped out onto the porch of the saloon, a fresh drink in hand. He squinted into the setting sun and spat. "Another damn drifter," he grunted. But Jonas knew better. The way the rider came fast and straight, with no hesitation, dust rising high behind him. A man riding like he carried death on his back. The air shifted. The mood in Dry Creek turned. Whispers rose like the wind. Jonas Harlan felt his pulse quicken. The old weight pressed down on him again. And somewhere out beyond the ridge, a lone rider galloped toward the dying light. The dust cloud rose higher as the rider neared, catching the last red streaks of sunlight as dusk slid over Dry Creek like a bloodied shroud. The wind, long absent, came now in restless gusts, stirring loose boards and rattling the hanging sign above the saloon door. Dry Creek's folk gathered behind windows and half-closed doors, peering out through warped glass and threadbare curtains. Even the muttering stopped. Even the flies seemed to pull back. Clara hung against the post, head low, the ropes at her wrists stained with blood where she'd struggled earlier. The rising wind whipped her dark hair across her face, and through the veil of sweat and pain, she forced her eyes open toward the approaching figure. A rider. Alone. Moving hard, kicking up dust in a long, desperate line. Eldon Voss stepped onto the saloon's porch, a whiskey glass in hand, the last of the day's heat reflecting in his greasy face. His men, sprawled in the shade earlier, now straightened, glancing to their boss for what to make of this. Amos Dake, the sheriff, sidled out, his badge dull in the dying light, a shotgun cradled in both arms. "Who the hell's that?" Eldon muttered, squinting through the haze. The horse came to a halt at the edge of the square, a lathered, exhausted sorrel gelding, foam streaking its flanks. The rider slid down with stiff, battle-worn movements, his face half hidden beneath a battered cavalry hat, Union blue coat hanging from his shoulders like a relic from a war no one spoke of anymore. He was gaunt, his face cut deep with the marks of long marches, hunger, and things worse than either. A jagged scar cut from his jaw to the corner of his left eye, his beard ragged, his eyes a piercing, unflinching gray. Someone whispered at first, "Nathaniel Bellamy." A gasp from the boarding house window. Widow Mabel's hand flew to her mouth. Even Eli, watching from the shadows by the livery, made a soft, stunned sound. "No," Jed Waller growled, voice uncertain. "That can't be. Bellamy's dead. Killed at Shiloh." The man took a slow step forward, removing the hat, revealing sweat-matted hair and the unmistakable face of a Bellamy. Older, harder, but unmistakable. "I ain't dead, Waller," Nathaniel said, his voice hoarse as gravel, yet carrying clear across the silent street. "Though I'd wager you'd prefer it." Eldon's face twitched, some deep, old anger surfacing behind his sneer. "Well, I'll be," he drawled, regaining his grin. "The prodigal corpse returns. Thought you was worm food, Bellamy." "I heard my sister was branded a thief," Nathaniel said, each word landing like a hammer blow in the charged air. "And left to die in the sun by cowards. I've come to take her home." Eldon laughed, though there was an edge of something brittle in it now. "Your sister stole from me. Town saw it. We dealt with it fair." "You call this fair?" Nathaniel pointed a shaking, scarred hand at Clara's limp form. "She's a girl, not a dog you tie in the dirt." "She's a thief," Eldon snapped. "Same blood as her old man. Same kind as you. Troublemakers, rabble. This town don't need you, Bellamy." Nathaniel's lips peeled back in something that might have once been a smile. "Dry Creek needed me bad enough when the war came. When they sent for men and boys, I went, while you stayed fat and safe." The gathered men behind Eldon stiffened. A few shifted their weight, not meeting Nathaniel's stare. Eldon's expression darkened. He motioned to Sheriff Dake. "Take him." Jonas Harlan, standing half in shadow, felt his gut knot. He hadn't planned to move, hadn't wanted to, but the sight of Clara, slumped and broken, and now Nathaniel, gaunt and unarmed, facing down Voss's pack of dogs, it tore at the threads of the old oaths he'd tried so long to live by. Two of Eldon's men came at Nathaniel, hands on pistols, but the soldier moved faster than a man half dead ought to. He drove an elbow into Jed Waller's throat, sending him sprawling with a choking gurgle. Nate Dobbins lunged, only to catch a boot heel in the gut and a hard left hook to the jaw. For a moment, it was as though the war had followed Nathaniel home. He fought like a man who'd survived trenches and cannon fire, his movements raw, desperate, fueled by months of death and the stubborn spark of the living. But numbers told. 3 more came from the saloon's porch, a bottle crashing, boots pounding. Nathaniel managed to drop one with a solid punch to the nose, but a rifle swung wide and caught him behind the ear. He staggered, blood streaking his face. Jonas felt the old itch in his hand, the phantom weight of iron that should have been there. "Damn it," he muttered. He turned and walked fast, unnoticed, down the alley behind the livery, the roar of his pulse drowning out the curses and shouts behind him. His shack lay a quarter-mile out, tucked against the rocks where the town gave up and the land took over. He reached it in long, steady strides, heart pounding not with fear, but with something older, something half-buried. Inside, the place was dark, the heat trapped like a beast. He knelt by the far wall, pulled up the loose board beneath the cracked stove. There, wrapped in oiled cloth, lay a cold peacemaker. Smooth, unblemished, oiled twice a year, though he swore he'd never draw it again. Jonas unwrapped it, the weight familiar, like an old friend. The ivory grips were worn, the barrel cold to the touch. 6 rounds in the belt pouch beside it. He loaded them by feel. By the time he stepped back outside, the wind had picked up, tugging at his coat. The sun clung to the horizon in a last, bloody smear. Dry Creek looked like a ghost town, shadows long, streets empty, but for the figures in the square. Eldon stood over a fallen Nathaniel, rifle in hand, barrel leveled at the soldier's chest. "I told you," Eldon snarled. "Ain't no one gonna save your sister. Ain't no one left to stand for your kind here." Nathaniel, bloodied and on his knees, glared up at him, lips split, one eye swelling shut. "You better shoot now, Voss, 'cause if you don't, I'll get up." Jonas Harlan watched from the alley's mouth, and for the first time in years, the weight in his hand felt like the thing it was meant to be. He took one step forward, and another. The last threads of daylight bled out behind the hills, leaving Dry Creek swaddled in a heavy dusk. The wind kept its restless howl, stirring dust through the empty streets and rattling signs on rusty hinges. A brittle, unnatural stillness hung over the town square, broken only by the rasping breath of Nathaniel Bellamy kneeling in the dirt, blood streaking his face, and the cold click of Eldon Voss cocking his rifle. "Any last words, soldier boy?" Eldon sneered, sweat and whiskey sheen dulling the gleam of his teeth. Nathaniel spat blood into the dust. "Yeah," he rasped. "You'll swing for this." But Eldon just laughed. "Ain't no gallows tall enough to hang me, son." A heavy footstep broke the air. From the mouth of the alley, a figure stepped into the open. Long coat moving with the wind, had brim low over a weathered face, a revolver hanging at his side. The old Colt Peacemaker gleamed like a relic under the last dying smears of red light. The world seemed to hold its breath. Eldon's smirk faltered. Amos Dake's shotgun dipped a fraction. Jed Waller cursed under his breath. "I'll be damned," Eldon murmured. Jonas Harlan. Recognition cracked across the faces of the older men like thunder through glass. Memories of a name once whispered with dread across badlands and border towns. Iron Hand Harlan. Gunfighter lawman, hangman when no court would sit, thought gone to drink or dirt years back. His ghost now stood before them in flesh and bone. "Hell," Amos muttered, eyes darting for cover. Jonas kept walking, boots raising thin trails of dust. The revolver hung loose in his grip, like an extension of his hand. His face, lined and gray-bearded, was cold stone. "I didn't ride in for you boys," Jonas called, his voice carrying like a judge's hammer through the hush. "I left this kind of filth behind a long time ago. But I'll be damned if I'll watch a woman strung up and a soldier murdered by a pack of gutless curs." He stopped beside Nathaniel, helping him to a knee without taking his gaze off Eldon. "You're harboring a thief," Eldon snapped, though his voice cracked. "Town law says." "Ain't no law here," Jonas cut him off, voice low and final. "Not when you make the rules, Voss. This town's sick, and you're the rot at its heart." Jonas raised his voice then, addressing the silent windows, the cracked doors, the shadows hunched behind fence rails. "I've seen towns like this. Hell, I made some of them bleed. And I learned something. When a man like this takes hold, you don't let go until you cut him out like the cancer he is." No one moved. Not a word. "Eldon Voss," Jonas went on. "This is your one chance. Drop that iron, cut the girl loose, and leave this town to bury your name." Eldon's lip curled. "You don't give orders here, old man." Jonas cocked the hammer of his Colt. "Last warning." Eldon snarled and spat into the dirt. "Kill 'em both." Guns lifted, 5, 6, maybe more, but Jonas was already moving. The first shot cracked before anyone else drew. Jed Waller's revolver barely cleared leather before a slug hit him square in the chest, hurling him backward. Another shot. Nate Dobbin spun with a hole clean through his neck. Jonas moved like a man half his years, the Colt speaking in rapid, bone-jarring reports, each shot true. Amos Dake fumbled his shotgun, cursing, but Jonas put a round through his shoulder, the scattergun falling as he toppled into the dust. The square exploded in chaos. Eldon's men scrambled for cover, their nerves shattered. Two bolted outright, vanishing into the shadows between buildings. A third fired wide and caught nothing but air. Nathaniel, dragging breath through broken ribs, grabbed a fallen rifle and rose, blood streaking his face. He shot a man trying to flank Jonas, then drove the butt into another's gut, sending him to the ground. And something changed in Dry Creek. Preacher Rowe, long thought a frail, defeated man, surged from the church steps with a rusted shovel, swinging it two-handed into the side of a man's skull. Mabel Carson hurled a stone from her porch rail, striking a hired thug square in the temple, dropping him. Eli, face pale and eyes wide with fury, darted into the open, a knife flashing in his fist as he cut the ropes from Clara's wrists. She collapsed against him, half dead, but alive. Jonas felled two more with steady, measured shots, each bullet a verdict. The square was thick with dust and gun smoke now, the last of the sunset drowned in the rising gloom. And then there was only Eldon. The big man stood alone, blood on his sleeve, rifle still in hand. He met Jonas's eyes, and for the first time, real fear leaked through his bluster. "Jonas," Eldon called, his voice tight. "We don't have to." "Drop it," Jonas said. Eldon raised the rifle, trembling. Jonas raised the Colt. The world slowed, hung suspended in the darkening square. A gust of wind sent dust curling between them. Somewhere, a window shutter banged. Eldon fired. Too slow. Jonas's revolver barked once, the shot slamming into Eldon's chest. The big man staggered, the rifle slipping from his grasp. Another shot punched through his gut, folding him in half. Eldon dropped to his knees, coughing blood into the dust, the last of his power bleeding out into the dirt he'd ruled for so long. Jonas stepped close, revolver lowered now. "You've hung enough men, Voss," Jonas murmured. "Time you met him." Eldon's eyes went glassy. He pitched forward, face first into the dirt. Silence settled over Dry Creek. Jonas turned to Clara, where Eli held her upright. Her face was bruised and streaked with blood, but her chin was lifted. Nathaniel limped to her side, wrapping one arm around her shoulders. It was over. The town emerged, one by one. Faces long hidden in fear, now free to step into the open. Preacher Rowe dropped his shovel and crossed himself. Mabel wept openly, clutching Eli's arm. A dozen other souls blinked at the square, uncertain how to breathe without Eldon's shadow looming. Jonas Harlan holstered his revolver. The cold weight settled at his hip again. He'd drawn for the last time, and the wind carried the smoke away. The square was silent now. Smoke drifted lazily in the cooling air, curling above the still forms of the fallen. A spent cartridge rolled across the dust with a metallic clink before coming to rest near Eldon Voss's lifeless hand. The wind had settled, but the echoes of gunfire still lingered in the bones of Dry Creek. People began to step from the shadows, hesitant at first, like deer after thunder, and into the battered remains of the only law they'd known for a decade. Clara sat in the dirt, slumped against her brother, her wrists wrapped in a strip of cloth torn from his coat. Her eyes were half-lidded, skin pale and clammy, but she was alive. Nathaniel cradled her close, arms around her shoulders as if afraid she'd vanish again. His face was streaked with blood, his jaw dark with bruising, but he smiled through it, a smile only a brother who thought he'd lost everything could wear. "I thought you were dead," Clara whispered hoarsely. "I was," Nathaniel murmured, "but I came back for you." Their embrace held no ceremony, just trembling hands, quiet sobs, and the quiet communion of family rejoined in the wreckage. Nearby, Jonas Harlan stood beneath the broken awning of the old mercantile, pressing a blood-soaked rag to a shallow graze across his ribs. It burned like hell, but it was far from fatal. He'd had worse. He watched the siblings quietly, the revolver still at his side. Around him, the townsfolk began clearing bodies, not with reverence, but with the grim efficiency of people reclaiming their home. Sheriff Amos Dake, left armed in a sling and eyes sunken with shame, stepped forward, hat in hand. He paused in front of Jonas. "I'm resignin'," he said quietly. Ain't fit to wear the star. Jonas nodded once. Took you too long. But you know it now. That's something. Dake looked at the square, at the people gathering, murmuring. You stayin'? Town could use a man like you. No, Jonas said. Town needs to stand on its own. Without men like me. Mabel Carson, her white hair damp with sweat and dust streaking her cheeks, stepped beside Dake. We'll call a meeting, she said, voice firm with new resolve. Vote in a council. No more bosses. No more bullies. I'll help mediate, offered Preacher Rowe. Just until things settle. He clutched his worn Bible to his chest and raised his voice. A town built on fear ain't a town. It's a prison. We'll build something better. Eli stood with the others, his knife still tucked in his belt, hands dirty, face flushed with pride. He'd helped free Clara, helped start something. Nathaniel, still holding his sister, turned his head toward the gathering. The Bellamy homestead's still standing, he said. Needs work, but I'll rebuild it. And when it's done, you'll have a place to meet. A safe place. You'll stay. Mabel asked, hopeful. Nathaniel looked at Clara. Her head rested on his shoulder now, her breathing steady. We're not running again, he said. Not ever. Jonas stepped back, dusting off his duster, wincing slightly at the pain in his side. He moved with the stiffness of an old man, but there was purpose in his stride. He passed through the town like a wind gone still, the wake of a storm, quiet now, but not forgotten. Some looked up as he passed, unsure whether to speak or thank him. Most didn't know how. He stopped briefly by Nathaniel. You've got strength, Jonas said, voice low. Use it right. Nathaniel nodded. I will. And her, she's got fight in her, Jonas added, eyes flicking to Clara. The town didn't break her. Don't let the world try again. He tipped his hat, turned, and walked toward the edge of town. No fanfare followed him. No parade. Just the faint creak of his boots in the settling dust and the whisper of whispers behind him. He reached the shack where it all began just as the sky paled from black to blue. The stars faded slowly, as if reluctant to yield. Inside, he took the revolver, cleaned it, oiled it once more, and wrapped it in cloth. He placed it back under the floorboards, where it had rested for years, hopefully for good. Outside, the desert waited. He mounted an old bay horse that had been grazing at the edge of town, the animal's head low and breath steady. Jonas looked back once, just once, at Dry Creek. The square had been swept. Clara was gone from the post. The sun would rise soon, and the town would be different. He rode out as the first sliver of sunlight crept over the far ridge. The desert glowed gold and red, heat still waiting in the shadows. His silhouette faded into it like a ghost returning to its grave. And in the town behind him, a new dawn broke over Dry Creek. The boards were still cracked, the wind still dry, and the scars still fresh. But something had changed. Doors were opening. People were speaking again, not in fear, but in hope. Because sometimes, justice rides in from nowhere. A shadow, a stranger, a man broken by the past, but still willing to stand tall when it mattered most. They would tell stories about the day Iron Hand Harlan came back from the dead. They would speak of the branded girl who stood tall, the brother who fought for her, and the town that remembered what it meant to be free. And the sun rose, casting long shadows and golden light over Dry Creek, painting every rooftop and window with the quiet promise of a new beginning.